Sandra Quinonez's haunted snapshot, El Paso High School, Texas. I've always been fascinated by photographs. The way a lens can freeze a moment, locking it forever, even as the world outside shifts and changes. A photograph feels honest, permanent, incapable of lying. That's what I believed, at least, until the day I took a picture inside El Paso High School. The building already carried a reputation, one I had grown up hearing about long before I ever set foot in its echoing hallways. They called it the Lady on the Hill, a towering brick monument with Roman-style columns perched high above the city. From a distance, it seemed proud, elegant, timeless. Up close, though, you could feel something else. The structure breathed with age. Its walls were heavy with memory, saturated with decades of lives, joys, and tragedies that had seeped into every crack of stone. On the day it happened, I had my camera with me, a simple digital point-and-shoot I used for school projects. It was late in the afternoon. The corridors had emptied after class, and the building had grown strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel natural, but staged, as though everything had stepped aside to make room for something else. I remember the smell most clearly, a stale mixture of chalk dust and floor wax that lingered in the air, but underneath it there was a sharper odor, like rusting iron. The lights above hummed faintly, a sickly fluorescent buzz, and their glow spilled unevenly across the hall. Some bulbs flickered, some remained stubbornly dim, leaving stretches of shadow where the daylight couldn't reach. I raised my camera almost absent-mindedly, wanting to capture the way the afternoon sun cut across the high windows, how it painted the dust in the air gold. The first shot clicked, then the second, the mechanical sound harsh against the silence. Through the viewfinder, the hall looked different, flattened, washed in a faint gloom that didn't match the light around me. I took another step forward, the soles of my shoes scuffing against tile that seemed stickier than it should have been. I snapped another shot. That's when I noticed it. In the photo preview, the hallway stretched the way I expected, but someone was there. A figure standing midway down the corridor, faint, half-formed. They were blurred, as though the camera had caught them mid-motion, except I knew I hadn't seen anyone when I took it. The figure was pale, tall, dressed in what looked like clothing from another era. I blinked, looked up from the screen. The hallway was empty. A chill crawled across my skin. My first thought was that it was a trick of the light, some kind of double exposure glitch. I lifted the camera again, framing the same spot, and pressed the shutter. The photo appeared, and there it was again, clearer this time. A boy, maybe a teenager like me, but his features were wrong. His face was elongated, his eyes sunk in shadows, his mouth slightly open in a silent sound. His posture was unnatural, slouched forward as if the weight of his own body was dragging him down. I lowered the camera, my breath sharp in my chest. The hallway remained empty. The air, though, felt different, thicker, colder, pressing against me like invisible hands. I could hear the faint tick of something metallic, like a clock far away, though I knew no clock existed in that corridor. I told myself to leave, but I didn't. Curiosity rooted me in place, or maybe it was something stronger, pulling me deeper into the hallway. My feet moved slowly, almost unwillingly, each step echoing too loudly. The shadows seemed to stretch as I passed beneath the flickering lights, the edges of the corridor bending in ways that made me dizzy. I lifted the camera again. My fingers trembled, but I pressed the button. This time, the figure stood closer. Not halfway down, but just a few feet away. His face filled the frame, pale and grainy, his eyes two hollow pits that seemed to absorb all light. The blur around his outline wasn't motion. It was wrongness, like the air itself refused to shape him properly. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the camera. I lowered it quickly, my eyes darting up. Nothing. The corridor was bare, silent, the dust drifting lazily in the golden shafts of sunlight. But the air smelled stronger now, metallic, sharp, almost suffocating. I turned, wanting to retreat, but the hallway behind me seemed longer than before. The distance back to the stairs stretched unnaturally, shadows pooling across the tiles like liquid. My throat tightened. I raised the camera once more, almost without meaning to, and clicked. I'll never forget that last photo. The boy was right there, standing directly in front of me. His face blurred almost beyond recognition, but his eyes were clear. Not eyes like mine, not even human, but voids. Cavities that looked into me, through me, stripping away every layer of safety I thought I had. His mouth hung open wider than before, impossibly wide, as if he were trying to pull the air itself into him. And yet, standing there in front of me, the hallway was still empty. The pressure in my chest was unbearable. The silence roared, louder than any sound, crushing me with its weight. I turned and ran, my shoes slamming against the floor, every step echoing like a gunshot. I didn't dare look at the camera again. I didn't dare look behind me. By the time I burst out into the sunlight, gasping, the desert heat felt unreal, like stepping into another world. Students milled outside, laughing, shouting, alive and oblivious. My body shook, my fingers numb against the camera that still hung from its strap around my wrist. Later, when I looked through the photos again, my stomach twisted. The first few were normal, dust and sunlight, empty corridors. Then the figure appeared, blurred, faint, impossible. And the last one showed me. I was in the frame, though I knew I had been holding the camera. My own face was turned slightly, my eyes wide, my mouth open mid-breath. And standing behind me, just over my shoulder, was the boy. His hollow gaze fixed on me, his blurred form stretching unnaturally, leaning closer. I don't know how that image exists. I don't know how I could be in my own photo. But I know what I felt when I saw it. The same pressure in my chest, the same suffocating silence that had filled that hallway. I deleted the photos eventually, or at least I tried. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I still see them. That blurred figure, that hollow gaze. And when I wake in the middle of the night, the air heavy and still, I can almost hear the faint click of a camera shutter. As though the boy is still out there, taking snapshots of me. Officer Najera's Midnight Patrol, Ysleta High School, Texas. Midnight patrols were usually uneventful. A slow crawl through empty parking lots, a check of locked doors, the occasional raccoon scurrying across the asphalt. Most nights were defined by silence and repetition, a rhythm that lulled the nerves into forgetting that anything bad could ever happen in places like schools. But Ysleta High was different. Even before I signed on as a security officer, I had heard things about this campus. Whispers from teachers, rumors passed between students. Stories about voices in the halls long after dark, about doors slamming when no one was around, about shadows that moved when the lights stayed still. I dismissed it the way anyone in uniform would: folklore, exaggeration, ways to make the graveyard shift sound spookier than it really was. Then came the night when I stopped dismissing. The air was unusually heavy that evening. A summer night in Texas carries its own kind of weight, humid, sticky, the smell of asphalt rising into the air even long after the sun has set. The parking lot was quiet, my patrol car rolling slow across the cracked pavement. The glow from the floodlights stretched in cones of pale yellow, leaving wide patches of darkness between them. I parked near the gym entrance, stepped out, and let the night close around me. The sound of cicadas echoed faintly from beyond the fences, but inside the grounds it was quieter, as if the school itself absorbed every noise. I checked the locks, the windows, the usual routine. My flashlight beam skimmed across glass and brick, catching motes of dust that seemed to hang thicker here than anywhere else. Inside, the halls felt colder than the night outside. The air conditioning was off, yet the temperature dropped the moment I crossed the threshold. The scent of disinfectant lingered faintly, sharp and chemical, but behind it was something else: old wood, paper curling from age, and the faint sour odor of dampness that had no reason to exist in a desert climate. The silence was not complete. My boots struck the linoleum with steady echoes, bouncing off the walls and vanishing down corridors that stretched further than they seemed during the day. Now and then, the building itself responded, the groan of settling beams, the faint tick of pipes, the sigh of vents that hadn't blown air in hours. But these were natural noises. I told myself that. I turned down a side hallway, one lined with lockers on both sides. My flashlight washed over them, revealing dents, scratches, stickers half torn. The beam caught something else too, handprints smeared faintly across the metal. Not fresh, but not entirely old either, as though someone had trailed their hands along the lockers just before I arrived. The prints were too high, too irregular, some of them angling downward in ways that didn't make sense. I swallowed hard, tightened my grip on the flashlight, and kept moving. At the far end, a door stood ajar. That in itself was unusual. Every door was supposed to be locked by the time I started my patrol. The wood frame looked warped, the paint around the handle chipped, as if it had been forced open years ago and never properly fixed. I nudged it with the tip of my boot. The hinges groaned, long and low, like a voice straining out of the dark. Inside was a classroom. Desks were stacked near the walls, their surfaces scratched with years of graffiti. The air was thick with dust, each breath dry and heavy. I stepped inside, the beam of my flashlight cutting across the blackboard at the front. Faint chalk marks still clung there, numbers, fragments of words, half erased but somehow resistant to time. That's when I noticed the temperature. The room was cold. Not just cooler than the halls, truly cold, the kind of cold that makes the skin tighten and the breath plume white. My pulse kicked in my throat. In the silence, I heard something else. Not the groan of the building this time, but softer. A shuffle, a drag, the sound of feet moving slowly across the linoleum. I swung the flashlight beam across the room. Nothing. Just the stacked desks, the blackboard, the empty floor. But the sound persisted, faint but distinct, as though someone were circling me, always just beyond the edge of light. The air thickened. I could smell something metallic now, sharp and wet, like iron left too long in the rain. My stomach churned. I turned to leave, but froze. Someone was standing in the doorway. The flashlight beam caught the edge of them, tall, thin, the outline blurred as though my eyes refused to focus. Their head tilted slightly to one side, an unnatural angle, their arms hanging slack at their sides. I couldn't see their face. The shadow of it seemed deeper than the rest of the dark, a hollow that swallowed the light. For a moment, neither of us moved. My body screamed to run, but my legs refused. The silence stretched tight, the only sound my own pulse hammering in my ears. Then the figure stepped forward. The sound was unbearable, a dragging scuff against the floor, deliberate, slow. The cold deepened, biting at my skin. My flashlight flickered, dimming with each step it took, until the beam barely reached beyond my own hands. I backed away, the air burning my lungs with every breath. My shoulder struck a desk, the metal frame screeching across tile, the sound piercing in the silence. The figure paused, tilting its head further, as if listening. I couldn't take it anymore. I shoved past the desk, bolted for the side of the room, and found another door near the corner. My hands fumbled against the handle, slick with sweat, but it gave way, and I stumbled into the hallway beyond. The corridor stretched ahead, endless, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above. I ran. My footsteps thundered against the tile, echoing too loudly, like the building itself was amplifying the sound. Behind me, faint but undeniable, came the drag of footsteps, slow and deliberate, never hurried, always close enough to remind me I wasn't alone. When I finally burst through the exit doors, the warm night air slammed against me, shocking after the icy breath of the building. The cicadas screamed again, the city sounds drifted back, and for a moment I felt alive. I turned, looking back at the school. The windows reflected nothing but darkness. The hallways were silent. No figure followed. But I knew what I had heard, what I had felt. To this day, when I patrol near Ysleta High, I never linger by that side hallway. I keep my eyes straight ahead, my footsteps steady, and I never, ever let myself slow down. Because somewhere inside, past the warped doors and the dust-covered rooms, something still walks. Slow, patient, dragging its feet in the silence. And it's waiting for someone to turn off the lights and step inside again. Bonnie Juarez and the Paranormal Investigation, Ysleta High School, Texas. I never thought my interest in the paranormal would take me back to the very hallways where I once carried my books, shuffled to class, and counted the hours until freedom. Ysleta High School was not just a building of brick and mortar. It was a living memory, one that still held the echoes of adolescence. But that night, it wasn't nostalgia that pulled me back. It was something else, something darker. By the time I arrived, the air was heavy with stillness. Midnight in El Paso has its own silence, but the school amplified it. The red brick facade loomed under the pale wash of the moon, each window reflecting nothing but blackness, as though the glass had ceased to exist. My car's headlights cut briefly across the steps before I killed the engine, and then it was only me, the shadows, and the faint pulse of my heart reminding me I was still alive. The school smelled of dust the moment I pushed open the door. Not the gentle dust of neglect, but the sour, invasive kind that clings to old papers and rotting wood. I let the beam of my flashlight sweep across the foyer, landing on the trophy cases, their glass streaked with grime, the gold inside dulled into shadows of their former gleam. The silence pressed close, so thick it muffled even the scrape of my shoes against the tile. I had been told the third floor was the most active. That was where the investigations always drew something. Footsteps, whispers, the occasional shadow drifting just out of reach. The air was stale as I ascended the stairs, each step groaning under my weight as though resisting me. My hand slid along the railing, the wood smooth in patches and splintered in others, as if worn unevenly by hands that no longer walked these halls. At the landing, I stopped. The air was colder. My skin prickled as if I had walked into a freezer. The beam of my flashlight cut across the long hallway, stretching into a tunnel of pale light and darkness. Lockers lined both walls, their doors dented, some slightly ajar. The smell here was sharper, metallic, as though something unseen had rusted in the dark. I started forward, each step deliberate, my ears straining for something beyond the rhythm of my own breath. That was when I first heard it, the faint tap, tap, tap echoing down the corridor. It wasn't the sharp click of heels or the scrape of rubber shoes. It was softer, lighter, almost childlike. My stomach turned cold, but I pressed on. The sound faded as quickly as it had come, leaving me in silence once more. But silence, I realized, was never just silence here. It was a presence in itself, a living void pressing against the eardrums, waiting to swallow anything that dared disturb it. I reached one of the classrooms rumored to be most active. The door resisted my push, its hinges shrieking in protest, but it opened enough for me to slip inside. My flashlight beam caught a dozen desks, each arranged haphazardly, some overturned, some stacked. The blackboard stretched across the wall, chalk dust still clinging to its surface despite decades of abandonment. My light skimmed over faint writing, numbers, equations, and then something more. A word, a name, scrawled unevenly as though written in haste. The letters blurred under the dust, but I could swear they spelled out something familiar. The air in the room was stagnant, but the cold intensified. My breath puffed visibly in the beam of my flashlight. Then came the smell, a wet, earthy odor like soil freshly turned. The kind of smell you expect at a grave, not in a classroom. I froze, every nerve in my body alert. And then the whisper came. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even distinct. But it was there, riding the air like a current, threading through the silence. A tone, a breath, maybe even a word, but too faint to grasp. My skin crawled, the fine hairs on my arms lifting as though I had stepped into a live current of static. I backed toward the door, each step cautious, my light jerking across the room as I scanned for movement. Nothing. Yet the whisper followed, curling around me, soft, insistent. Out in the hallway again, I let the silence close over me like a blanket. My pulse drummed hard, echoing in my ears. I turned right, toward the far end of the hall. That was when I saw it. The figure stood halfway down, near the drinking fountains. The beam of my flashlight stuttered as it caught the outline. A girl, her frame small, her head bowed, hair spilling forward to obscure her face. She didn't move. She simply stood there as though waiting. My breath lodged in my throat. I forced the flashlight steady, but the figure blurred at the edges, refusing to sharpen into focus. My mind screamed to turn back, to run, but my legs moved forward in slow, deliberate steps, as if compelled by something stronger than fear. The closer I came, the colder the air grew, until it bit at my skin. The smell of soil returned, stronger, heavier. My chest tightened with each breath. And then, with no sound at all, the figure lifted its head. Where a face should have been was only darkness. Not shadow, not obscured features, but true absence, a hollow void that consumed the light. My knees nearly buckled. The beam of my flashlight faltered and died, plunging the hall into blackness. The silence broke with a sound that will never leave me. The slam of locker doors, one after another, cascading down the hall like a violent wave. Bang, 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 each strike reverberating in my chest, rattling my bones. I staggered backward, hands fumbling for the wall, trying to orient myself in the suffocating dark. And then it stopped. The air shifted, warmer now, the smell dissipating. My flashlight flickered back to life, weak but functional. The hallway was empty. No figure, no movement, only rows of lockers standing silent as if nothing had disturbed them. I didn't linger. I made my way back down the stairs, each step heavy, my breath ragged. The building seemed to resist my departure, the walls pressing close, the shadows stretching longer. When I finally pushed open the exit door, the night air rushed in, warm and dry, filling my lungs like salvation. From the safety of the parking lot, I looked back. The windows were black, their surfaces blank and unreflective. But in the upper corner, where the third-floor hall stretched unseen, a faint glow flickered, as if a light had come on in a room long abandoned. I turned away, unable to hold its gaze any longer. Even now, the memory clings. The smell of earth, the whisper threading the silence, the hollow face that drank in the light. I had gone there seeking proof, and proof was what I found. But no photograph, no recording, could ever capture the weight of that presence, the crushing certainty that something lingers in the halls of Ysleta High. And I know I will never set foot inside that building again.